I want a tube amplifier.
Why?
Because they are better, mister. Don't you know that?
Yeah.
The vacuum tube is the fundamental element in all modern communication devices. Long-distance telephone, public address system, electric phonograph, sound motion picture, radar, radio transmitter, and radio receiver. First, let us consider how a three-element vacuum tube, the triode, operates. A tungsten filament extends into a tube such as this. A cell supplies a current which heats the filament. When the filament gets hot enough, electrons are emitted. The electrons build up a space charge in the tube. As the charge builds up, electrons are repelled back to the filament, and finally as many return as leave. Now let us add a second element called the plate. Actually, the plate is a metallic cylinder surrounding the filament. The plate is connected to the positive side of a high voltage battery. Since the plate has a positive charge with respect to the filament, electrons are attracted to the plate. A stream of electrons thus flows from the filament to the plate inside the tube, to the battery, and back to the filament. This is the plate circuit. If the voltage on the plate is increased, the plate current will increase since more electrons will be attracted because of the higher positive charge.
Discovering security. And I'll explain this here in just a moment. So whenever you look at a vacuum tube, you want to remember this. The upside down T is the plate or the anode. Okay?
Hopefully they turn green, and hopefully none of them turn red. If any turn red, that means the tube is dead. There we go, green, all in working order. You know, one of the neat things about this amp also is the Mark 6. If you plug in, if you short the speaker wires, if you plug in your speaker wires and you accidentally touch them together, which you should never do, but this amp has a protection circuit that'll actually shut off the amp. Do that, so you don't damage it.
Audiophiles swear by amplifiers which contain vacuum tubes to boost and modify the electrical signal. They were the norm until transistors came along in the 1950s. Many audio enthusiasts still prefer tube sound, which they find warmer, richer, and more natural. Once standard in radios, phonographs, and televisions, today you see vacuum tubes only in very high-end audio equipment. They come in an array of models designed to perform specific sound-enhancing tasks. Technicians at this Czech factory first wind wire a precise number of revolutions with a very specific degree of tension. Then they clean the surface and weld it to a support structure. This completes the grid, one of the tube's main components. Next, technicians take the second main component, the cathode, and insert it into the grid. When the sound signal enters the tube, the cathode produces a flow, both of which are greater than that of the original signal. This makes the signal larger and more powerful. A glass blower skillfully crafts it out of hard laboratory-grade glass. Using a high-temperature torch and glass-making tools, he melts the open end and seals it off. Then he blows in a bit of air to shape the end into an evenly rounded dome. Now he mounts the bulb on a lathe to complete the shaping. Keeping the glass evenly heated, he blows in just enough air pressure to keep the bulb from collapsing inward. When the glass reaches just the right temperature, a die presses against it, setting the final shape. Next, they mount a glass collar over copper wires clamped into a motorized vise. Then insert a glass straw called an evacuation port. As the vise rotates, they heat the collar uniformly with stationary torches. Using a handheld torch, they remove any stretches or runs in the softening glass.
Puppy's World here, folks, and welcome to my video called The Truth About Tubes. Now that we have a small idea of what tubes are, and there are multiple, countless amounts of literature or documentation, education you can find on what tubes exactly are, I'm just going to attempt to effectively illustrate or emphasize why buy a tube amplifier. And in no way, shape, or form am I going to attempt to illustrate anything concerning RIAA amplification or solid-state amplifiers versus tube amplifiers, as that will be in another publication of mine or posted video at some point in time. However, why do people want tubes? I have simply gone through this obsession myself, and let me tell you, it is a very, very expensive and a never-ending search for perfection in terms of audio. Certain people, I'm just going to give my opinions here, and that is that particularly baby boomers, individuals who grew up in, the 50s, 60s, 70s, they are, particularly in my opinion, partial to tubes since, well, they were around in the tube era prior to transistors being available in amplifiers, guitar amplifiers, radios. That was the preferred method of, taking an alternating current, converting it to DC current, and amplifying sound. When transistors came around, it became more or less a cheaper, more readily available form of amplifying the audio, so it changed. I'm going to also attempt to give my opinion on this as to vinyl sales have increased so much over these last few years that also, in my opinion, people are going to attempt to choose what form they reproduce the vinyl audio in a form that, well, they may have used listening to vinyl. So, hence what I'm saying here is people who are used to listening to vinyl back in the days, 50s, 60s, 70s, once again, they used tube amplifiers to listen to it, so hence they feel that, in my opinion, they should be using tube amplifiers to play a record nowadays. And that may be true. That's their opinion. That's what they want. That's their preference. To be honest with you, I'm used to growing up with my father being an electrical engineer and a very, very large, expensive, I believe it was an 18-inch woofer guitar amplifier I grew up utilizing. It was very fun. You got to see all four large tubes light up in the back of it. And to be quite honest with you, it was wonderful sounding quality audio. It was completely different than the amplifier for a guitar that I had purchased several years later once I kind of became 16, 17 years old and started playing guitar myself. It sounded nothing like it, and it was, a 16th of the cost. I ended up selling that tube guitar amplifier of my father's years and years ago for probably $750. Fortunately, of course, I still have the Gibson and Norma guitar of his that was from the 50s and 60s. But here, I'm just going to attempt to show you, when you type in tube amplifiers on the internet, on Google, this is what comes up. And particularly audiophiles like myself want tube amplifiers. You know, the question really is here, are tube amplifiers better than solid-state amplifiers? And I think the answer is in the manufacturer or producer of the particular product line itself. I'm just trying to attempt to illustrate for you. In my opinion, guys, don't waste your money. Yep. Yes. 12AX7 is correct, and they start anywhere from like $10, as you can see here on Amazon. T12AX7 SJJ vacuum tube for $10, and I think they go up to, let's see here, let's find the most expensive one we can. And before I attempt to find you the most expensive 12AX7 tube out there, I'm just going to run through quickly. This is a great internet page from the Tube Store, by the way, which I have utilized in the past with great experience. These are a few of the ones that I kind of ran through top to bottom, believe it or not, in terms of quality and pricing. So these are all the tubes that the Tube Store sells that are the 12AX7s. And these are great tubes, and they're for an affordable price, believe it or not. And I think one of the reasons that people prefer using tube amplifiers is the fact that they're fun. You can play around with them by switching them out, swapping them, saving up your money for a more expensive one, and determining if it does an improvement in your audio quality or not. So yeah, when we do a Google search, and I'll just show you what I searched for, all I typed in here on Google was the most expensive tube amp. And what we find here is in upwards of $15,000. We've got a T plus AP 3000 HV preamp using tubes. We've got a KT88 from EAT Diamond tube costing $1,600. And we've got a $14,000 A linear power supply, I'm guessing. Power amplifier, no. 1 megahertz to 500 megahertz, a Class A 25 watts. And then we've got something that I would recommend, which I couldn't afford myself and didn't want to get into being able to attempt to try to buy this thing. But the MAC, the MAC, Macintosh 6700 stereo receiver. And guess what? No tubes needed to be seen on him. So I think one of the Macintosh tube amplifiers that I would trust happens to be this one, the 275. It's extremely renowned. It's been tried and tested. I've heard one in my lifetime before, and I would have to say that it is quite impressive. And it's kind of what started my tube obsession several years ago. And, you know, after hearing one of these things and seeing someone play around with them and swap out the tubes to more expensive tubes and whatnot, you get a desire to want to replicate it yourself, let me tell you. And you know, I've been involved in a study in the past, in an audio study that involved over 50 people. And let me just quickly tell you, I see my receiver there. But let me quickly tell you that audio is subjective to the listener, no matter what. And what I mean by that is, I'll just explain. This study that I was involved in years ago took 50 people, and it separated them into a controlled study and an uncontrolled study. And in the controlled study, it blindfolded 50 people. And it did not tell them that they were going to be comparing tube amplifiers to solid-state amps. And what it did is it played audio from an expensive, very expensive, high-end, I believe it was a $20,000 tube amplifier, and played audio from a solid state, very, very cheap, $200 amp. And at the end, they asked everyone, which audio did you prefer, and what do you think was the tube amplifier? Dan Augustino right there. I have to say, I love that. I've seen a little impressive display of them. But they asked people at the end, what did they prefer, and what did they think the tube amp was? To be quite honest with you, what do you think I'm going to tell you? Of course, exactly. They preferred the solid-state amplifier sound, and that they thought that the solid-state amp was the tube amp. And no. So what the listener feels like or thinks he's going to hear determine what he hears. That actually determines it. And they've done multiple studies on this, controlled and uncontrolled, to determine that this is true. What you generally believe you're going to hear is what your ears are telling you sounds better. So, ultimately at the end, do tubes make audio sound better? Are they the better preferred way of listening to audio or reproducing it? And should you yourself buy a tube amplifier if you're attempting to have the best sounding the best quality audio in your home? And I can't answer that question for you. I just can't. Only you can answer that question for yourself, and you'll only be able to by, buying a tube amp, listening to it, and comparing it to a solid-state amp in your home. And I think what you're going to find is what I'm telling you here, that over about I'd say about $500 to $1,000, when you get into the tube amps, they're beautiful, they're wonderful, they're exciting, they're fun to use, they're interactive, they light up fun, but then when you get into the cheap $100, $200, $300 tube amps, you're going to find that they're starting to use LEDs to light them up. They're not even a full-on vacuum tube anymore. It's just a gimmick. It's a marketing scheme to make you think that you're back in the 50s, 60s, or whatever, and enjoying a full tube amplification when you're really not. So that's how I have to sum up my video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed my little illustrations here, publications. If you'd like, I'm not going to at the time, but I can list every little form of illustration I gave you, particularly on my Sony 4K TV there. I hope you enjoyed all that. Yeah, I can talk to you about where I got some of my information. None of this information I'm giving you is by far, not findable online itself. I haven't even given you that many specs or facts, So I hope you enjoy my little video here, and it's all my opinion. I'm not, by any ways a expert on this at all, but I have wasted tons of money, probably a total of like $3,000 on this stuff in the last probably, I'd say 4 years. So in the last 5 years, yeah, I've probably thrown away like $5,000 or more on tube amplifiers. And what did I find out at the end? What did all of it prove? Or how did I learn my lesson from wasting $5,000 on audio equipment? And what did I ultimately end up with? A solid-state amplifier. Let me just go over here and show you what I prefer listening to all the time. Believe it or not, I prefer listening to setups like this. This is just here for cleaning stuff and whatnot. If all of you have seen my setup here before. Actually, you haven't. You haven't seen my my Rega planar. I'm sorry, not a Rega plan. A Rega turntable sitting here before. I've yet to show you guys that. But to be quite honest with you, this is probably by far my favorite setup to utilize with an orthophone, cheap, one of their basic entry-level cartridges, moving magnet, of course. I haven't even gotten into the moving coils just yet without running into problems. But this is probably by far one of my most favorite setups. And it's all solid-state amplification, guys. So, hope you'll take away with this that you won't waste your money. I'm not bashing the Knob Sound brand or company in any way. I'm not bashing tubes. I ultimately, at the end of this, am telling you that, yes, I have confirmed for myself as well, too, that tubes do sound better, in my opinion. They're warmer, more fun. They're less crisp and detailed in terms of a solid-state or a digital amplifier. But, it depends on what class of amp you're listening to as well. So, yes, I prefer tubes, but I prefer saving my money also and not blowing thousands of dollars on something that I can ultimately obtain for hundreds of dollars. So, thank you for watching this, guys. Please subscribe, as I'll hopefully have a lot more interesting, entertaining things to report on in the future here. As I've got a lot of products to do reviews on that I've yet to post. I've got a lot of things to report, a lot of setups to configure and whatnot, and then ultimately my perfect home theater that I've gone ahead and pre-thought out and, gone through this for months and months and months, mitigating every factor possible, by a human being that could possibly think of every factor. I mean, carpet, floorboards, ceiling tiles versus can-style lighting, everything in its acoustic capability, its transferability with audio, my reflection points. So I'm planning on bringing you at some point here, possibly by the end of the summer, hopefully, the world's best home cinema. Literally in every way, shape, or form. So I'm planning this ultimate theater build here in the future. And hopefully I'll have to show you that, as I want it to be a surprise someday. I hope it will. But, you know, it is a dream of mine, so it's yet to be fully, you know, completed in any way, shape, or form. But we're working on it, and I hope we enjoy this video, and please subscribe. Thank you so much.